Learn all about living in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, from Charles Thomas in this video interview with expats in Mexico. At age 42, you said, I'm out of here, I'm heading to Mexico.
Yeah, there was a group of us bankers that were very, very close, and we used to vacation together every year. And there were about 9 of us, and we would rent a big fat house in Puerto Vallarta. And we would spend a couple of weeks in the winter just pampering ourselves. And so it was one of these friends who had brought that book. And I read that one poolside one day, cover to cover, and then I went back and bought every book I could find about retiring in Mexico. And so I'd already sort of had my sights set, and I thought that I would be moving to Puerto Vallarta just because I knew it, because we'd been there so many times. And then people said, yeah, you've been there in the winter many times. In the summer, it's unbearable.
It gets a tad warm, yes.
Yeah. And then a friend of mine who had lived in San Miguel for a year when she was 13, and we'd known each other since elementary school, she said, if you're moving to Mexico, you need to check out San Miguel. And then a cousin of mine had dated the daughter of the owners of the local gringo bookstore, which is no longer there. And he said, you need to check out San Miguel. And so I started looking at the different demographic, and the average age of expats in Lake Chapala and Ajijic was 65. And I was 42 at the time, and I thought, I'm not putting myself in that environment. And so I rented a place for a month to check out San Miguel, and within the first week I knew it was where I wanted to be.
And what was it that made you feel that way?
Well, one, it was a small town, and so it kind of took me back to my roots, you know, having grown up in a town of 1,500 first and then a town of 30,000, and after living in a metropolis like the San Francisco Bay Area, it was, you know, nothing was more than 10 minutes away. And it was also, I felt ageless when I arrived. In the US, I was always in the same sort of socioeconomic group. All of us bankers who grew up together, we were all around the same age, and we all made about the same amount of money, and you know, it was wine country, and you know, trips to Europe, but here I made friends who ranged from 19 years old to 80 years old, and everyone from starving artists to millionaires. And it was this community that would come together that was so diverse that it was like, if you were interesting, you were welcome. You weren't stigmatized by your money or your age. And that was it. That was one of the driving factors. The weather. I don't think you can find a place with better weather. You know, we have sun about 360 days of the year. Not necessarily all day, but at least there's some sun. And yeah, it's chilly in the evenings, but the days are all in the 70s and 80s almost year round.
Sounds marvelous.
Yeah, I think it is.
So, do you own a home or do you rent?
I own a home. That's another big change. I mean, I lived in a 100-year-old craftsman bungalow in Oakland before. I had a good-sized yard. Most of them were postage stamp size, but I was on a pie-shaped lot, and here I have 2 acres, and you know, a 3-bedroom main house plus a 1-bedroom guest house. And I tell a friend of mine who constantly says, you left at the peak of your career, you could have made so much more money. And I said, yeah, but I was making more money than I knew what to do with, and I had never been so unhappy. And I measure my success by the number of toilets that I have. And in Oakland, I had one toilet, and I have four toilets now. So,
That's hilarious. That is hilarious. Now, you're living outside of San Miguel, right? In the countryside?
yeah, it's only about 5 minutes from the edge of town, and 25 minutes to downtown, compared to my commuting to work, which would be an hour and 15 to 2 hours when I was in the Bay Area.
Did you buy your home with cash when you purchased it?
Yeah,
How much
not
did
cash in a bag, but cash and money transfer.
I understand that. So, how much did that cost you when you bought it? What year did you buy your home?
That was shortly, let's see, probably about 2004. Yeah, I think it was 2004. And I mean, we looked at one house and bought it because at the time my mother had passed away and I was bringing my 92-year-old father down to live with me. So finding a home that was single level living was very difficult. Plus my father was from Eureka and before that from Oregon and was a country guy, and he was accustomed to looking out and seeing expanse. And to see expanse in San Miguel, you kind of have to go upstairs, and stairs were out of the question for him. So we found this country place. It had been built as a summer home, and the owners were Mexican. They were renting it out to gringos, and we got it for $225. But it had, the renters were still there, so for another 6 months we collected the rent, and then they were building at the beach. They moved to the beach, La Manzanilla, and then we gutted the place and redid. Didn't move any walls, but changed every surface. And later we built the guest house, and now we also have dog runs. So I've probably put 400 into it.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of land.
So, what do you think it's worth now?
Homes in the country don't move as fast, and the main house is older construction. It was built in the 70s. We did upgrade all the electrical and plumbing and everything. I would imagine it's probably worth 550.
And the square footage is what?
Oh, we do. I'd have to say probably 2,800 square feet in the main house and another 600 square feet in the guest house.
Are you pretty involved in the local expat community? It's quite a large expat community in San Miguel.
It is, and I would say that socially, yes, probably 75% of my socializing is with the expat community. I'm not nearly as social as I used to be, because when I first moved here, socializing was all there was to do, and socializing in school and events and those kinds of things. Now, after working all day and getting back home to the countryside, we don't go out that often.
So you're homebodies.
A little bit, yeah.
Well, I would
Yeah,
imagine that you have friends come over and you dine at their homes and so forth. So there's a lot of that
exactly.
kind of interaction that goes on there.
Yeah, and it's a pretty tight-knit group we're part of. I read something in one of those books about retiring to an expat community. It says that you may find yourself socializing with people that you would not have socialized with at home.
And do you find that true?
I found it to be true initially when I first got here. It was like, if you found a friend, they were a friend, even if they were someone that you might not have chosen as a friend back at home. After living here this long, you kind of weed through that and find your core group. And, we're very blessed to have people in our lives that we would keep in our lives forever, even if we moved. we're very fortunate.
How fluent are you in Spanish?
I tell people that I speak restaurant and taxi Spanish. I can feed myself and get where I need to go. It's probably, I'm underestimating myself in that I do show houses in both languages. When it comes to meeting with the notario's office on a transaction, there are a number of people in the notario's office who do not speak English, so I'm forced to use my Spanish there. And I probably should point out that I am married to a Mexican man, and he has an enormous family. I might have told you they were here for Semana Santa. For 3 days, we had 55 house guests.
Wow. And
they pitch tents in the yard, and it's a big camping party. And there's only a handful of them who speak English. So my Spanish gets, every Semana Santa, my Spanish gets a real workout.
Well, it's all about family in Mexico, as you know.
Yes. And my mother-in-law talks a blue streak and asks a question every few minutes to make sure that I'm listening. So.
Yeah, yeah. Do you dine out often?
Not that often. It's usually for an event, like someone's birthday. Or if we have guests in town. Like we have guests coming into town, old high school friends of mine, 2 sisters that are arriving on Saturday. And so I have a list of a number of places that I'll be taking them for dinner so they can experience town. When we do eat out, we tend to favor places that are outside the circle of town. For example, there's a place called Rojo Vivo that's in an old hacienda that is a grill place that does the best ribeye you've ever had and best burgers. And there's parking. And then there's Hacienda Los Picachos, which is right behind our house, which is an operating boutique hotel. So they have a wonderful restaurant there and parking. There's a place called Embarcadero, which is seafood. That is in a mall just outside the circle of town, and we'll eat there, as well as Oko, which is a Asian fusion place.
Nice. So you've got some international dining opportunities there also.
We are really a dining destination here now. There are a number of places that are just exceptional, and downtown some very high-end places as well.
For a nice evening out by the way, what is your partner's name?
Rodrigo.
Rodrigo. When you and Rodrigo go out for dinner for a nice meal in San Miguel, what on average would it cost you with tip and wine and everything?
Well, it runs the full spectrum, because if you go to your sort of more traditional Mexican places here, probably the equivalent of $50 for 2 people. And that's all the courses and the wine and everything. If you go to some of the high-end places like The Restaurant or Zumo or Bovine, then they have. There's not a wine on their wine list that is probably under 1,000 pesos. So there's your $50 right there for the bottle of wine. And so then your meals are going to be up there too, 400 to 500 pesos a plate. You're going to walk out having spent $150 probably.
So, what do you think are some of the advantages and disadvantages of living in San Miguel?
Well, the advantages are climate, cost of living, carrying costs if you own a home. The property taxes are ridiculously cheap. Mm-hmm. On my 2-acre place in the 4 bedrooms, I pay less than $300 a year.
That's terrific.
And I'm zoned rustico as opposed to urbano. Someone may pay double that in town, but it's still a fraction of what you would pay in the United States. You can get domestic help here. We have a maid 3 times a week that we pay probably the equivalent of $50 a week. And we have a gardener 5 days a week for the equivalent of about $75. And the gardener also takes care of our dogs because we have 11 dogs.
11 dogs, wow.
Yes. Well, Rodrigo is a breeder and handler of show dogs.
What other advantages would you say to living there?
What did I say already? Climate, domestic help, cost of living, cultural. It's to be in such a place where the cultures are so fluid. It's coming from the U.S. It just felt like there was so much more segregation, and here I'm one of the minorities, but I don't feel it. There's just this fluidity of the different communities here, and we have an Italian community, and we have a German community, and the American and Canadian, and people here tend to embrace cultural diversity. And that's one of the things that strongly attracted me to San Miguel. Mm-hmm. And also the art and music scene here is very active. The architecture is, people have described it as feeling very European. And it's true, it's a 500-year-old city.
It's a beautiful city.
Yeah. So those are all things. When I first moved here, and it's been like 15 years now, I was desperate for Jif extra crunchy peanut butter and for cranberry juice.
Yeah.
And now cranberry juice is easy to find here. The Jif extra crunchy comes and goes, so I tend to stock up on it when it's in stock.
What about disadvantages? What are the things that you really don't kind of like?
Well, as the city has grown, so has the crime. And just a sense that you have to watch out for your security, where when I first moved here 15 years ago, you could walk home in the middle of the night without a worry in the world. That's not the case anymore. Like most major cities, you don't want to walk home down a dimly lit street in the middle of the night. So that part of the bloom is off the rose. Mm-hmm. The traffic, that has become a disadvantage after all of these years. So what else?
Narrow, hilly streets, part of the problem. Yes. Too, right?
Yeah, and people double parked where they shouldn't be, and if one of those, like just the other day, it's really about cooperative driving here. Up one of those narrow, hilly streets, some cars stalled, and you can't drive around them. There's nowhere to go.
There's no room, right?
So it becomes this big row of cars backing up so that everybody can turn down a side street. And fortunately, people do drive here very much in the spirit of cooperation. There's no stop signs. So the rule is uno y uno. And the problem is on the weekends, the drivers from out of town don't always get that. And they are not as polite as the locals are. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, yeah, and they're cobblestone streets, so no one's driving extremely fast.
Sure. So tell me, what do you think are the 3 things that you love most about living in San Miguel?
3 things I love most. Well, they would be the friends I've made here, the climate, and the diversity. I have to put those 3 things probably at the top of my list.
What advice would you give to someone who was looking at Mexico and saying, I'd love to live in Mexico, I'm not sure where to live. San Miguel looks like an interesting place. What kind of recommendations or advice would you give them?
That they pick me as their real estate agent.
Shameless plug.
I would be happy to show them, find them their dream home in San Miguel. No, I would probably find out what motivates the person who wants to live in Mexico. A lot of people think all of Mexico is just a big beach. And there is so much more to Mexico than the beaches. And they are desperately hot in the summertime. We do have clients that are moving here from beach places because they're tired of living in air conditioning in the summertime. We don't have air conditioning here. It's very rare to find a house with air conditioning. You need a ceiling fan or a fan for a couple weeks of the year is about all you need. If climate is important to them, then I would advocate that they check out here. If they like jungle, then maybe they want to look at some place like Chiapas. It's really about what kind of environment. There's a lot of places you can live very inexpensively in Mexico. San Miguel is one of the most expensive, but there's a reason for that. It's because the expat community and the tourists have driven up the prices here. It is a small town, so this fantasy of living cheaply near the center of town and having the Mexican experience, that's kind of becoming only possible for the wealthy. But you can live 5 minutes away from town very inexpensively, and take the bus in, or as some people do, they'll drive to one of the supermarkets, park there, and take a taxi to downtown.
Makes sense.
Yeah. It's if it's water sports, this is not the town for you.
Charles, thank you so much. Great advice.
Okay.
I really appreciate you. I'm glad we finally got a chance to connect, and it's been a terrific opportunity to interview you. Thank you so much. Tienes que intentar luchar por seguir.